Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's APM webinar, The Role of Shared Values in Helping Project Teams Succeed. I'm delighted that Patrick from Qatar Post is joining us today. My name's Robert Allen. I'm your APM host, and I'm the APM Branches Manager. We're delighted that so many of you can join us today, and I hope this finds you all well. We're really keen for your involvement today, so if you have any questions for Patrick, please submit this in your control panel, and time dependent, I'll put these to Patrick at the end. We're also running a quick poll in this, so keep an eye out for that and please get involved as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Patrick for his time, but also the volunteers of the APM SIG and the APM branches for all their achievements with running these webinars. This session will count towards your CPD and should last no longer than an hour. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking to you from sunny Qatar. It's the start of our weekend. We're 3 hours ahead of you, and we tend to work 7 till 3. We also work Sunday to Thursday, so I'm not distracted. I'm looking forward to this, but it's a nice way to end the weekend. So hopefully we'll have a good session over the next hour. Thank you for calling in. Okay, I'm going to knock my camera off so you've got the slides, and then I can knock it back on for the questions at the end. Okay, this slide, I just wanted to start by giving a bit of background to myself. My title at the top is a hyperlink through to my LinkedIn account. So if anyone wants to send me a message or a connection, you can do it through that way. I've put the snakes and ladders there, and I'll cover it a little bit in the next slide. But this is really that although you have a plan of where you want to go with your career and what you want to do, it's not going to be a linear path where you go straight away from where you're starting out and where you hope to be straight through without any bumps or snakes on the journey. So I didn't have a plan that I was going to end up doing what I'm doing at the moment exactly, but I had a rough idea that I wanted to do a management degree. I studied managerial and administrative studies, to give it its full title, in Aston. Part of my experience there, as well as what you learnt on the course, but through involvement with the rugby club and the athletic union, and also organising like graduation dinner, doing those sort of social projects was the start, really. I probably learned as much about project planning from having to organise those things as I did from then going on to the various assignments and things that we had to do for the course. At the end of my degree, I was offered an opportunity to join Royal Mail on a one-year contract, working on a RailNet project where Royal Mail was moving work from road to rail. And I thought that's a great way to get some cash together to go travelling. Unfortunately, things didn't quite pan out like that. I spent 22 years in Royal Mail working in various roles, HR, operations, process improvement, and throughout my career I've gone back to project and programme management. I think one of the things I really found when I first went into project and programme management, having had this really good grounding on the RailNet project when I started out, is a lot of the operational managers didn't really have those project and programme management skills. So one of the things I really tried to do was to make it as easy as possible for them, giving them very sympathetic project plans to follow, where I was also producing some of the tools, whether that was draft agreements for them to present to the union, or communication tools for them to share with the staff at their offices. But I had a very good time in Royal Mail, learned a lot over the years, worked with some fantastic people. They supported me through my masters, which I did part-time in management learning in Lancaster. And then probably the toughest 4 years of my career were as a plant manager, where I was running various plants around the West and Midlands region. It was also probably the one where I learned the most. And all the time that you're a plant manager, that's running the biggest plants I ran, Manchester, 1,500 people. all the time you're focusing on doing lots of different projects and managing a lot of the activity as you would a project. So I then went back into project and program management within Royal Mail. I completed RPP in 2015, just after this opportunity had arisen to come out to work as part of a transformation project for Qatar Post. So there were 7 of us who came out here, and we had Qatari deputies who we developed over the first 4 or 5 years. First 4 years we were here, and I'm now one of 2 people who are left. Who we transferred to Qatar Post in 2018 when the Royal Mail assignment was finished, and then when the opportunity to convert my RPP to chartered status came around, I was, I think, in the 2nd group to do that last year. So a bit of a potted history there. I've got my full initials and everything up at the top there. I've never really used those. The BSc Hons and MA have only ever really been useful in Qatar. It's something that they do hold a lot of stead by in the Middle East. But apart from that, it's been experience that's mattered more than the qualifications while I've been working in the UK generally. What I thought I would do, this is just a quote I always found useful and backs up what I was just saying then, that in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So the planning you go through, the project management, the whole activity you do about preparing and planning for a project, that's always vital, but you also need to be able to adapt those plans to changing circumstances, to changing requirements. And I found, the reason I put this in here is that I found that doing work on values when I'm starting up the project team, it's always been part of that essential preparation, because when you're in the thick of it, when you're working to deadlines, if you've got issues that come up, you've got dilemmas about, do we go this route, do we go that route, how do we operate as a team, you get disagreements maybe between team members. If you can take it back to a shared set of values you had when there wasn't that pressure on, it often is a very good way of resolving dilemmas, of resolving conflict within the team, and in terms of the way that you want to behave as a team. So hopefully I'll give you some examples over the next few slides, but I've always found that quite a useful quote just to refer back to. So before going into the process, I thought it would be useful, and this is actually probably the majority of the time, is just sharing a few examples of where I've used this approach and how it's been successful, how it's been useful. So the first example was, this is probably around about 2001. We were on a project called Project Veronica. I think they were named after the sort of project sponsors' ex-girlfriends, but it was essentially we were setting up Royal Mail. You would have seen that we had a network that competed with us in the UK, TNT. So people may have had deliveries from TNT postmen, and the theory was, around this time 20 odd years ago, that each country could really sustain only 2 postal networks. There wasn't the opportunity to have full competition. There's probably, so if you'd have the established postal company in the UK, it's Royal Mail, in Netherlands TPG, who were part of TNT Group, and you could probably get the people who were in next, you could only really have 2 competitors. So in different countries, we took different approaches. In Sweden, we bought the number 2, which was a local firm. In Germany, we tried to build it up as almost like a kind of business club where people paid a subscription and they got guaranteed business, and we tried to set up a network that way, working largely with sort of petrol stations. In the Netherlands, we tried to set up the equivalent of a Royal Mail delivery office. It was the closest thing. The uniform was the same, it just didn't have the branding on. And that was in an old aeroplane factory in the middle of the Randstad. So what had happened is these were commercial projects, and the commercial people wanted to keep Royal Mail they wanted to keep HR out of the project at that time. It was typical, if you're setting up a business in the Netherlands, you have an interim HR manager. But in our situation, the person that they'd hired, they hadn't made the progress that they wanted. So essentially, they were about a week to 2 weeks from launching this new operation. They had the traffic set up, they had the customers set up, which was mainly other posts who were sending mail into the Netherlands, were going to send it to Royal Mail to deliver in the Netherlands rather than TPG. But they didn't have all of the staff in place, they didn't have all of the terms and conditions in place. So we needed to go in there and rescue a situation. And we saw it very much when we got there on the first night on the Sunday evening. There was a huge amount of work to do, and it would have been very tempting to dive straight into work. We had a week. There was a team of about 8 of us, and we had a week to get all of this work back on track. But before we dived into sort of task allocation and trying to deliver the work, I got the team together and went through this values exercise. And there was a bit of sort of, why are we wasting time on this? Let's get into it. But what we found as the week go on, it really set us up in the way that we were going to make the most out of this opportunity. We weren't just trying to deliver for that 1 week for that opportunity. It was also about convincing the commercial people that actually we weren't just bureaucratic and going to say no in the HR team, the international HR team. We were there to help. We were there to enable, and so it really set the tone. So over the course of the week, I don't remember the specific values. I know we definitely had achievement as one of them, and a lot of the focus was about being sort of really professional and really achieving and delivering a very professional output. And so we worked, we must have worked sort of the best part of 60 hours between Sunday evening and Wednesday evening, and we'd got ourselves into such a good position that essentially by Thursday morning, we were just able to refine and revisit the project. And we were even in such a good position that we were able to go out and celebrate and have a nice meal on Thursday evening. And so this really sort of set the tone for me, that this sort of little leap of faith I'd had about starting off by getting these values right, it had really helped us when people were feeling the stress in the first couple of days, and it just kept everyone focused about why we were trying to do it, the way we were trying to behave. And what we got on the back of this this project, as well as then being heavily involved in the rest of the project through the deployment and getting everything up and running, within a year there was another project that Royal Mail were involved in that was a joint venture with actually the Dutch Post, TPG, TNT, and also Singapore Post, called Project Spring, which is where we put all of the international sales teams together and created a joint venture. And because of the work we'd done on the Veronica project, the same project team had opportunities then to go and do what they'd done in the Netherlands, in both Brussels and in New York. So by having this good practice, by having this sort of values-based approach to the way we wanted to manage the project, it created an opportunity for us down the road then or a couple of opportunities down the road where we had sort of great professional experiences, but also it was a great experience. It was I hope this is no slight on Chesterfield, but a lot of the time in Royal Mail you would go and spend time, a night away would be in Chesterfield. So having a night in the Netherlands or New York certainly was a nice contrast to that. Not that there's anything wrong with Chesterfield, I'm very fond of it. So those are a couple of examples from maybe 20 years ago. A more recent one, the last big project I was involved in while I was in Royal Mail in the UK was the Shrewsbury Mail Centre closure. And again, what I had here was I had a team, an experienced team. I'd worked with most of the people before, but I had an experienced team of 7 or 8 people who were dedicated to the closure of Shrewsbury Mail Centre. We were taking the work and we were splitting it between Cardiff, Chester and Wolverhampton mail centres. So the 3 postcodes were going in different directions. And I also had a team that was doing more of the business as usual projects in Royal Mail, delivery revisions and collections revisions, that kind of thing. So I had a team in total of about 18 people. So again, we did the values exercise as we got together as a team. And what everyone in the team, including the people doing the business as usual stuff, is really the way that our team would be viewed over the whole year was going to be on the success of the closure of Shrewsbury. So there was that. What that meant is, even though everyone else was busy, that there were certain times when we had key dates, key milestones in the closure of Shrewsbury when the work the sort of TF postcode, Telford closed, and all of the work went into Wolverhampton. When the Brecon mails went down to Cardiff, and then the SY, which Shrewsbury and Mid Wales, all of that work. We had people from the wider team. They went and they based themselves in delivery offices that were affected, and even if they were just getting on with their own work at their laptop, they were still there, they were still visible. And that kind of approach, having these conversations early on, meant that there was no need ever to put any pressure on anyone. It was one where you just put the call out, and everyone responded in terms of seeing that we were about a team. We wanted to be seen as professional, we wanted to be seen as successful, we wanted to be seen as enabling change, and we understood that part of that was that at times we would be flexible and we would help other people in other parts of the team. And it worked vice versa, that the expertise and the experience in the Shrewsbury Mail Centre team, they supported other people when we had key dates in other parts of the team. So some various examples that from Royal Mail there over the years. A more recent one in Qatar Post. We're in the process of building a new headquarters and sorting facility, as we've called the mail centre here. And there's a huge amount of construction in Qatar with they've built an underground system over the last few years. They've got a fantastic airport that opened just before we arrived in 2014. The 8 stadiums are looking amazing. They're all pretty much finished. So a huge amount of construction work. The road infrastructure, there's building all the time, skyscrapers everywhere. And when we sat down with the consultants about what we wanted to do and the timescales we wanted to work at, the lead consultant from our partner, she said that every single project that she was managing was behind timescale, had gone off track. So it was just then again we went through this. I went through this exercise with the team, and you could see that these kind of people who are very used to working in a certain way, and the sort of established rules of how we manage projects, how we manage construction projects in Qatar, were thinking, well, you can see this guy's just come from sort of HR learning and development and his approach to it. But again, what we committed to was, I made a promise to them that they said that the reason that there are delays in all of these projects is just the timescales, that if something isn't agreed at one meeting, or the right people aren't at a meeting, it gets postponed, things get pushed back. So going through this about, again, focusing on achievement, focusing on what we wanted to do as a team, and my challenge to her that we would keep everything on track with this project. It changed the way that she normally operated, and her feedback and the feedback from her team was that they really enjoyed working on the project with us, because I made a commitment to them that I would always have the right people in the room to make the decisions, and if I didn't have the right people, I'd make the decisions myself. And that then really enabled them that they kept the deadlines with us. So we had a fantastic 18 months working through all of this. The processes and the procedures and all of the different protocols you have to go through when you're building something in Qatar, in order to get us to a position where we'd made the appointment and everything was on track. So again, it was a virtual team. I wasn't the line manager of them in the way that I was with the Shrewsbury Mail Centre team, but the idea of agreeing these values in advance, so that when we have any disagreements or any disputes, it wasn't about blame and who was this, who was that. Very much I was working in partnership with them, and we were a team. So so a recent experience of how it's worked, and then even in the last month or two, I've moved into a new role as a couple of my old Royal Mail colleagues have moved back to the UK recently, and with my new team, I've been through this exercise in the last few weeks, and it was kind of 3 separate teams that have been brought together. But again, it's very interesting doing this exercise, and I'll show you an example on the next slide, or the next few slides, about how you do it. But my experience with them, different things come out, and I'll cover that as we go through it in a moment. So that's just a bit of background of where I've used this and where it's worked, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask any questions a bit later on. The reactions to it, again, part of the challenge with this is managing upwards. Kind of people are saying you've got all these tasks to deliver and you're trying to talk about values. So it can be a challenge, and you do have to do a little bit of stakeholder management, both within the team, within the people affected, and also sort of upwards, because the value of this, I've always found, only really comes out when you're under pressure. And if you try and do this kind of work when you are under real pressure to achieve deadlines, that's when it doesn't work. It has to be done in advance when the pressure's off, and when people can really sort of take the time to think about what they want to do over a coffee and buy into it in that way. This is a useful model. It's from about 1984. I think I used it when I was in Aston, and it's from an unpublished dissertation. But I've always found it a very good way of understanding some of the things. So when you talk about why would we look at values, why would it be important as a project? If your values are linked to your philosophy and your principles, the micro techniques, the little ways in which people do things, the ways in which people behave and act as members of your project team, the way they interact with the different stakeholders, you're not going to change that in them by just saying at a policy or a tactical level, this is how we're going to do things. I've always found it needs to be something where you can escalate it back up to values, where you can go back and say, well, look, we had this conversation about how we were going to behave as a team, and this is in that instance, if that's what we've said is important, then there's only one way that we can really interact with these people. There's only one way that we can behave in this situation. So that's where I find it a very useful link. I hope I've explained myself. Please ask me about it later if not. But you have the sort of thinking and the doing, and while the values and the spending the time to think about the way we're going to behave as a project team is very much on the thinking time, the value of it is then in the doing. It's in the way that they interact with other people. It's in people meeting deadlines. It's people doing what they said they're going to do, getting their reporting in on time, and you're not having to chase everything. You're not having to chase people up about why things haven't been done in the way that we've agreed that they're going to be done. So on to the next slide. I'm sure you've seen variations of this before, but what we tend to display with the Iceberg concept, I think this is taken from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. They use this analysis amongst other places, and I quote them on the other slides. What's below the surface then is feelings and emotions. How are people feeling about what we see? And that's going to come a lot of it from personal values and beliefs, which is going to be informed by your influences, experience, and expectations. So what we're starting to do in this exercise as a project team leader, where I found it very, very useful, is one, you get to go below the surface a little bit with your project team, and you understand what are their motivations, what are the things that are really important to them. If someone talks about, when you do this value session, about how they, one of the real struggles for them is work-life balance, you can build that into it as a team, and it again, other people in the team, that won't be so much of an issue. And particularly with the Shrewsbury team, there was definitely times when people were covering for each other and supporting one another in a way that meant that if someone needed a few hours off to go and attend something at school, then someone else was happy to cover that off, and it was swings and roundabouts that they would get support in other times. So, as well as the sort of the personal self-awareness people get from doing this exercise, it's very useful as a project team, and also for the awareness amongst project members of understanding what's important to people, and that people aren't just necessarily what they see in terms of the way people behave in work, that there's a lot more going on. So the exercise itself, it's included in the handouts list if you wanted to download it and have a look at it. I'd encourage you to do it. The way I've always said to people to do it is just make yourself a coffee, find somewhere quiet to sit down with a printout of it and a paper and a pencil, and just take half an hour to work through it and have a think about it. But the exercise essentially, again, it's not a new exercise. It goes back to the early 90s. So there's a bit of background about why values are important, and that there can be if there's a distinction between what we say are espoused values, what we say is important, and what we profess we believe in, and what people see in action, then that's where that can cause some issues for us, and it can also make it very uncomfortable for people working in project teams. So when we've actually done this exercise, one of the important things is giving people the opportunity to share their values and to say what's important to them. And sometimes you'll get a situation, I've had it before, where people almost like they want to go last because they're writing them out as they're listening to everyone else. Sometimes people just want to put up their post-it notes. They don't want to talk through it. That's all fine. But the important thing is that people have had an opportunity to reflect on what's important to them and the way that they behave at work, that you're giving them the opportunity within the team to share that. And then when you agree a set of values for the team, their input is in there, their voice has been heard. So that's basically why we do the exercise and how you go about it. And the exercise, essentially what you'll see in the handout, the second page of the handout is a list of potential values that you might think are important. You can also add to them. The one that I pick on the next slide, one of them is one that I'd added that wasn't actually on the list. So you work through that list and ideally select 10 that are important to you. If you have 8 or 9, you can add other ones. Then step 2, now that you've got 10, if you had to then reduce that down to 5, which ones would you give up? If you had to give up, and normally what you'll find is the way that you can decide that is when you've had dilemmas, when you've had difficult decisions to make in life, whether that's professionally or personally, the decisions that you made in those tough situations, that will normally lead you to which way your values are, and I'll explain that a little bit more when I share mine in a moment. And then you continue that exercise. What you want for the team exercise is those top 5 values, because they're the ones that are that you're going to use. As you work it down and people bring it down to their most important value, that's very important for them. But in terms of building a team set of values, it's having the 5 is really helpful, because it means that you can ensure that at least 3 or 4 of everyone's values are brought into the team value statements. And then finally, this is the self-reflection that you want people to do. You want people to work through these kind of questions for themselves. But in terms of the team exercise, it kind of stops at that bullet point just after step 2, where you get down to the final 5. And then it's really about how much people want to share. Okay, so this is an example of a set of values from a fairly typical project team. I'm at the top there. It's something very much to think about where you put yourself. If you're the person, if you're facilitating this session as well as leading the team and being a participant in it and sharing your values, you can kind of dominate it, and there is a risk if I'm at the top of the list and I put my 5 values down first. On the positive side, I can be a role model and I can set the sort of precedent for how people can go about the exercise, and I can, by giving disclosure and open myself, then that can encourage other people that it's okay to do that. In another way, you can dominate the team. You can have too much of an influence, and everyone ends up picking values that very much mirror your own. So you have to kind of pick and choose your team on that one. I've definitely adopted different approaches with different teams. If they need a bit of leading into the exercise, there's a reticence to share their values, then I will share mine first as a lead off. If I think it's quite a strong group and they're comfortable sharing their values, I'll hold mine back till the end so that people can I've still inputted and I'm still part of the process, but I've not dominated it by giving mine first. So what I do is ask everyone to share their values, either write them on a post-it note and just put them up themselves. You can stand there with a pen and write them as they read them out. You can ask them to send you the forms before the meeting and populate the table before the meeting. It's what you think is best for your team. I've used all of those approaches with different groups. And then one of the key things to do is to look for value. So look for themes. So I've said my most important value is responsibility. I absolutely hate to let people down. If I've made a commitment to someone, whether that's professionally or in work, or it's you know, as a parent, or in any situation, I really hate to let people down. So when I think of responsibility, and other people are giving words and ideally explaining what those words mean for them. I've said, sorry. So my second one is honesty. So I'm going to say that I'd forgotten that learning was the first one that came up, but honesty is the second one. That I'd want to be the same person at work as I do at home. I don't want to have to play a role. I want to be able to be myself, and being open and honest with people. I don't want to have to think about who I've said what to. I've put it as second, and that's because there are certain times as a leader or as a parent or in situations where you have responsibility that you have to be aware of what you can and can't disclose. So it's not that you go around being dishonest, but there are certain things that you've either had to sign an NDA over, or it's something that you have to protect the people that you're working with to an extent. So that's how I differentiate between those two in terms of the ranking. That I always want to be honest, and I'm not dishonest, but there's also times when you have to withhold certain bits of information, either to protect people or to protect the company. And then the third one, then getting onto it, is learning. And again, I want to learn, I want to grow as a person, I want to work in meaningful projects that give me interesting work to do. But at the same time, there's a time for learning, and there's also a time when your responsibilities might mean you need to focus on delivering, and you haven't always got time to consciously learn or to spend time doing formal learning or something like that. So it's getting that balance. So I've picked learning there, and I'll just focus on my top three. So I've then looked, as other people have shared their values, for things that I can link into learning. So growth, meaningful work, personal development. I've kind of said, from people's explanations, I would try and make links to my value of learning, and we will have a value then as a team around learning. So we're working on this project together, but we also want to learn. So the example I gave in the Netherlands, we wanted to learn as a team about how we could deliver these kind of projects successfully, but also to give us the credibility then and the confidence that we could go into other project situations and deliver. Secondly, then, responsibility. So from what other people say, that's where you can start to pick up, well, actually, the way that person's described leadership, it's similar to my explanation and my response, the way I've described responsibility, the way that they described having a family or their reputation. So these are ones then that I start to pull together as a link, so that I can find that the common threads in people's values, so that when we agree a set of values as a team, everyone has to feel part of it, that it's not just sort of my values or someone else's values, but we've found some common themes. And then finally, honesty. We can find that a number of people have put that. So as you start to come up with this, so I mentioned before that when I've done this work recently with a team where there's the majority are Qatari, one of the things that comes across very strongly is faith and religion, and that's something that generally, when I've done teams in Royal Mail, it doesn't come across very often, but in this context, in this culture, it's much more prevalent. So again, when you listen to why people have put that in there and how it affects their life, we can link it into the responsibility or the honesty in terms of the reason that they put it in there and why it's important to them. So you still can link these things in. It's about finding the common themes about what's important to people. So applying for personal values to project teams then. So the project team values from those previous statements. So from the learning grouping, we want to learn from this project, from this meaningful project experience. We want to grow and learn from this meaningful project experience. So that's the first project team value. The second project team value, sorry, is we take our leadership responsibilities at work at home very seriously, and we strive to be regarded as reliable people who achieve and deliver on our promises. So leadership, responsibility, getting that work-life balance for the people who said having a family was very important. We want to be regarded as reliable. We want to be well thought of. So reputation comes into it, and we want to achieve and deliver. So it's a big statement. There's a lot of things in there, but the idea is by having something that's quite broad for the project team, you've brought all of the project team members into that. A lot of them would feel affinity with that statement, and they would have buy-in with that statement. And then the third one, this was about the honesty. We'll act, report, and behave honestly. So often in projects, you know, if things are off track, or if there's going to be delays or the project risks and things like that, it can be something that you have to really think about. How do we report this? But what we're saying as a team is we don't want to be kind of in a political game. We want to act, report, and behave honestly, in particular when we have any concerns about the integrity, direction, and deliverables for the project. So I just wanted to pause there for a moment. You didn't give your values, and you've probably not had the chance to complete the exercise yet. I hope you will do. But we just wanted to ask the question at this point about whether or not you would want to work in this project team. So if you had these values as a project team, would you want to be part of it?
Excellent, thank you, Patrick. So we've loaded up the poll and made that available to everyone. So it's great that we've got over 130 people with us today. So the responses are coming in. We're up to 57% completion rate. Yesterday in a webinar, I was bad cop and I said I wasn't going to share any of the results until I at least hit 80%. But I'm going to share. It's hopefully comes as no surprise, but we're on 100% yes, with 80% of the audience participating. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on then. So why is this important, and how does it help you? So some of the ways, and I've referenced the other reading material in the bottom of each slide, but one of the ways in habit 1 of 7 habits of highly effective people, what Stephen Covey talks about there is that proactive people respond according to their values. So they accept responsibility for their own behavior and they focus on their circle of influence. So if you look at the values exercise that we've done, when it comes to that, reactive people, they allow outside influences to control their responses. Something happens and they respond to it. Whereas with the proactive people, what you're trying to focus on here is the space between the stimulus and the response gives us an opportunity to respond according to our values. So as a project team, you quite often get clients who change their minds. You get people who aren't always 100% supportive of what you're trying to do. You're bringing in change, so there's going to be some resistance to change. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get the project team to focus on, these are our set of values, this is how we've said we're going to operate. So can we stop and think about how we're going to respond to some of these challenges that are coming from either the sponsors or the different stakeholders that we're having to deal with? you know, in Royal Mail, quite often it would be a challenge with the unions to both management and the frontline unions to get changes through, and we had to think very carefully about how we would respond in a way that kept us focused on the project deliverables, but was consistent with the way we wanted to behave as a team. I think this is a good example. This is one of the quotes they use about someone responding with values. So the concept of whatever the provocation, I'm not going to respond in a violent way. I'm going to have peaceful resistance. So I'll leave you to read that as the answers, as the lines come up. So this is a very powerful example of someone responding according to their values. So, and again, if you think of other sort of great leaders, Nelson Mandela, after all the time he spent in prison, to come out and look for sort of truth and reconciliation to be his watchword rather than punishing the people who'd locked him up. This is what we're talking about, responding to a situation according to your values. Here's another look at it from a slightly different, more from a sort of psychological point of view. If we have this self-awareness about our values and what we're doing, if you think about the stimulus response, the reactive people, it's single loop learning. Something happens and I react. Something happens and I react. So hopefully you learn in that reaction, but basically people are just reacting to stimulus. What you're looking for with a values-based approach is that people are actually stopping and they're going through this double loop learning where they're actually stepping outside of that action reaction and trying to understand, well, why we do what we do, what is it that's making us behave in this certain way, what is it that's going on for the union, what is it that's going on for these managers, what pressures are people under that would make them behave in a certain way, and trying to then go to them and understand what it is that causes that. So a lot of the issue when I said about the construction delays in Qatar, when you actually get to it, if the right people aren't in the room, and generally the right people are going to be the Qatari decision makers, there's a lot of expat managers in Qatar who are very concerned that if they get something wrong, it's very easy for them to be the fall guy, and that they will you know, they can be moved on if something happens that shouldn't have happened. So it's much easier for people to stick to the rules and the procedures all the time and say, well, you know, I'm not going to make that decision until this person is in the room, and just waiting for those people is what causes the delays. So by me saying I will make the decision if the right people aren't in the room, gave them the confidence to progress, because they know that I'm basically saying I'll carry the can for this with people if we make a decision and it's not the right one. Now, by and large, it didn't come to that, because I was able to get the right people in the room for the meetings to make decisions when we needed to make decisions. But understanding what's going on, not just looking at the actions and the reactions, but trying to step outside and understand what's going on. That's about trying to understand what values are at play here, what's going on. Proactive people increase their circle of influence. So a good example of this, it's probably about 15 years ago now, but there was a fuel crisis in the UK, and it was caused by one farmer who couldn't see how he was going to be able to continue to run his business if the fuel prices got up to £1.30 a litre, I think it was at the time. And so he was a farmer not far from where I live in North Wales, and he basically drove to the nearest oil refinery and parked his tractor in front of the oil refinery. And then none of the tanker drivers would cross the picket line, the one-man picket line, and other people then followed suit. And pretty soon we had a fuel crisis in the country, and fuel prices dropped from sort of £1.30 back down to under £1 at the time, as I recall. So I'm not advocating that anyone goes and causes this kind of disruption, and there was a lot of disruption at the time. You were sort of calculating whether you could get to meetings and other things. But it's about understanding, what can I influence? How can I grow my circle of influence? How can I grow my circle of so that things that aren't directly under my control? I talked before about it's one thing doing this kind of exercise when all the project teams report to you, but it's more difficult as you extend that. But if you want to influence the success of the project, you need to understand, how can I grow my circle of influence? So I've always liked the serenity prayer. Grant me the things to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. So in the example of the farmer who went and effectively broke the law, but it was a way that he could influence things, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I think all of those things, the serenity, the courage, and the wisdom are things that hopefully understanding our values will help us get towards that. So finally, I think that action, reaction, the double loop learning, the growing our circle of influence, the responding according to our values, all of these things are trying to get us to a situation where we're not always doing what we've always done to get what we've always got. We're trying to change the same old thinking, and we're not just after the same old result. So it's not about accepting that we're going to just dive straight into the task list when we get to the hotel in Amsterdam on a Sunday evening. Instead, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about values. It's not about just accepting that construction projects always slip behind. It's trying to understand why and trying to influence that. And there'll be lots of other examples. I'm sure you have had frustrations in projects you've worked in. And if we can go back to our values and understanding what we could do to influence that from a slightly different perspective, I've always found it's very, very helpful, and particularly if you've got the team engaged. And then finally, just some sort of more up-to-date research, transformative learning, changing how we do things. This links into so it's the latest research from LinkedIn. LinkedIn learning is a sort of big area of learning and development at the moment. That in order to get a change in understanding and a change in actions, you also need to refer to a change in the belief system. And obviously, going through the values exercise, even if it's not changing people's belief system, it's helping them to articulate it. It's helping us to understand each other and understand why people behave in certain ways. So that's really the content of the presentation today. I think we've got about 10-15 minutes for any questions. Over to you, Rob, on that one. Sorry.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Patrick. That's great knowledge shared. Before going into the questions, I'm just going to share David's comment, one of our guests today, who said, great presentation, agree. People change when the benefits outweigh the current position or the cost of not changing becomes too great. Understanding values and an individual lens is even more important in today's leadership characteristics. So you've definitely got some supporters out there for what you shared today. So thank you. Moving into the questions, if you don't mind, and I hope you're happy to share. Catherine has asked, have you ever had to deal with someone who did not behave in a way that lived up to the agreed values for the project team?
Yeah, an example that springs to mind was actually in the wider Shrewsbury team. They weren't part of the actual project team, but again, because you've done the values exercise, that leads you to behave in a certain way, and also you have to be consistent in the way that you behave with the values for the rest, because the rest of the team are watching in terms of, we've agreed these values. You're meant to be the leader. Are you going to live up to them? So I did in that instance challenge. I had a number of conversations with the individual about, this is how we're operating. This is what it's all about. And basically, we just got to a point where he'd reached a stage in his career. He was on wind down, kind of, the screensaver is a countdown to 60. And what we were able to do was for him to leave Royal Mail in a way that was on his terms as well as mine. So I was able to replace him with someone who was engaged and going to get involved with the sort of the way we were going to operate as a team and deliver. But we were in a fortunate position in that instance where we had redundancy, but I was very straight with him. I was assertive with him about what the expectations were for the team and how we were going to work. And that's probably a fairly extreme one, where at one end where I've managed someone out of the business in a way that they still felt good. We gave them they left with sort of dignity, and his wife actually worked in the same office, and she was happy with the way that we'd managed it, and agreed that it was something that he probably should have done a few years earlier. So that's one way of doing it. What I've also found is, by having the values set up in advance, it's quite difficult to argue with values, particularly if you've agreed them as a team. So that process of having the values, if instead of arguing or having conflict about the point in question, if you take it back to the values and ask the people involved, whether it's an individual who's not behaving in the way that's consistent with the team, or if it's two individuals who have a dispute, okay, let's revisit our values. We've agreed them as a team. How are we going to resolve this issue using these as our guide? It takes away a lot of the tension in my experience, and it really helps you to get to a resolution much faster. And it also, it's one of those about sort of, getting people through the change curve. It's one where, people are laughing and joking normally quite quickly afterwards, because it's kind of, Pat's got the beanbag out and we've all sort of sat round. But it does, in my experience, that's something, it helps you avoid the difficult situations more often than not, because you can take it back to the values. But even in an extreme situation where you have to manage someone out of the organisation or out of the team, you're making it their choice because they're choosing not to live up to the team's values.
Excellent, thank you, Patrick, and I hope that helps Catherine. To a number, and everyone, just a reminder that in the handouts there is the exercise that Patrick has mentioned. Patrick, just to let you know, Helen, for example, said, "Thank you. I wish I knew about this a year ago. I would have done that activity and it would have helped us move forward." A number of people said, "Thank you very much," and they're going to try the exercise in the near future. Great. So John has asked. Well, John's first started by saying, "Great presentation and thank you." He's asked, "Have you got any tips for encouraging focus on values in the early project phase?" And then John shared that in his experience, it's hard enough tying project teams to the table long enough to come up with a plan.
Yeah, and this is where it almost has to be. I think one of the things that I've found is, it gets a little bit easier as you get more experience. I was probably, I was still in my sort of mid to late 20s when I gave the example in the Netherlands. But if you can give people the impression, look, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. I'm an experienced project manager, and to be honest, one of the things that I always do, I do try to, straight away from the outset of a project, bring in as much little bits of theory that's not over heavy, particularly if you're dealing with people who haven't got huge amounts of project experience themselves, just to try and give people reassurance, peace of mind that I really understand what I'm doing here. This might seem a little bit unusual to you, but I delivered lots of projects, and this bit of what seems to you like a diversion now will really reap dividends once we get into it. So that tends to be, having a very clear project startup. I just make it one of the exercises that I do. So I've just started doing leading a project in the last few weeks, and the sort of first 5 exercises that we've done is once we've actually formed the team, we've done the values exercise. We've gone through a sort of I call it the milking stool exercise, where it's business, user, and technical, and we just list all of the all of the tasks, all of the restrictions that we face on the project. I do a project plan. In this instance, I've done it in from the sort of when we have approach, where it's just going back from when we have this new app ready to launch to customers, what are all the things we need to do in the build up to it, and then finally then the risk register. So having all of these things, I try to make it seem that, well, you need these things for a project to be successful, and having the team values or the set of values is just one that you would take for granted, that this is the way that we do it. Obviously, you won't always get that. When we first came, because I think between the 7 of us of the Royal Mail team that came out to Qatar, there was something like 250 years of experience in Royal Mail. It was ridiculous. I was the sort of the junior person with 20 years. Everyone else had over 30 years experience in Royal Mail. And so trying to an extent to get them, when we first arrived in Qatar, to talk about values and to talk about how we were going to interact and sort of not continually say, well, when we were in Royal Mail and things like that. I did get quite a few people who, if I take you back to the cartoon with the square wheel, I actually looked that up the first time because that one, I looked that up as a way of sort of playing it back to them. So I kind of acknowledged their response, and so the next team meeting we had, I put this up and said, this is my view of what's going on at the minute, that I'm trying to say to you, we need to have a think about how we're interacting with people, because it's too strong, and everyone's saying no, we're too busy to think about that because we're in the middle of delivering. Again, it's difficult to do when people are completely focused on it. You have to pick your moments when there's not the stress and the tension, in my experience.
Excellent, thank you, Patrick, and people have been coming back supporting and saying thank you for your answers as well. I'm aware of the time, but I think there's a number of questions that I could ask you, but I'm going to go with Ashley, who has said, how do you work with individual team members to identify and distinguish between their perceived top value and their actual top values?
To an extent, I've always found it really interesting to see what they think they are. It talks at the start of the exercise about people's espoused values and their values in action, and it can be a real start. So one thing, you can start to understand maybe where they're coming from when they give you their top value, in terms of the way that other people perceive them. But the second thing with that, though, is when you're then having one-to-ones with them, you can bring them back to what they've said their value is. So if their behavior isn't consistent with what they've said their values are, then just hold that mirror up to them and sort of say, well, this is what you've said is important. Is the way that we've done this consistent with that? Does that?
Yeah, that certainly helps. Thank you. So, Patrick, it kind of leaves me to say thank you on behalf of the APM and everyone that's joined us today for taking the time to join us from Qatar. I suppose the virtual world is making the world a lot smaller. So thank you for giving up your time to share and also answer the questions.
Pleasure, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I'd also like to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today, who's taken the time to interact with the poll, but also submit some great questions. I'm really sorry we couldn't get around to answering all your questions, but I'll send those on to Patrick and kind of get some answers for you. This is being recorded and it'll be on APM YouTube in the future, but definitely take that handout that Patrick has kindly given us and work on that with your teams, and it'd be great to hear the success that you have in the future. But it kind of just leaves me to say thank you to everyone. I hope you keep well, and we hope to see you at future APM webinars. Bye for now.